People are angry. People can't fathom why Brian Lenihan wants to pour €54 billion into the very banks that hold their mortgages, many of which are now in negative equity. I think people no longer trust Fianna Fáil when it comes to the economy. Can I just say as well that, in relation to the developers, over the summer I did a Freedom of Information request in relation to my own constituency and that of the Minister, because over the last 10 years there has been one gigantic battle after another when 200, 500, 700, 2,000 houses were built in various developments in Dublin West. And in that time, the land was rezoned, very often an awful lot of land, and only after the rezoning were the school sites acquired from the developers. And I asked you, and I asked the various ministers for education over the last 7 years, would they disclose what Fianna Fáil was paying to the developers for school sites. And finally in the summer, through a Freedom of Information request, I finally got the information. And it simply confirmed what I knew already, that the Fianna Fáil way was to pay maxi prices for mini sites, so that many children in my constituency are now going to school in more modern, recently built schools. But if you look at the primary schools, you see small strips of land on either side that are the playgrounds. Why? Because the developers who sold the land in my constituency, land that was rezoned, sold the land back to the government, having bought it at agricultural prices, sold it back for an average of at least €1 million an acre. And, one of the newspapers today carried the details of the Freedom of Information request, and what it basically shows is that one particular developer, whose company was called King of the Castle. And we know why it was called King of the Castle. Manor Park Homes. They got something like 5 million in two different tranches of 5 millions for a very small site to house 2 quite large primary schools. The other developers, Manoli, and the other developer, Park Developments, they all got fistfuls, shed loads of money for school sites. Now, in the last Dáil, and the Taoiseach asked earlier at the order of business that nobody over here ever said anything in relation to all of this. Well, in the last Dáil, the leader of the Labour Party brought forward a proposal to deal with building land, to take that kind of profiteering by developers at the public's expense out of the treatment of building land. So when the Taoiseach was holding up his hands today and saying, but nobody over there ever did anything about any of this, yes, we did. And I'm quite sure that Fine Gael can point to a lot of measures that they offered. So, it's great fun for you to slag off the opposition. And, it's great for an old laugh there on the backbenches. But other countries that have worked their way out of this, when Bo Lundgren came to Dublin some months ago, and the government praised him to the skies, he basically said 3 things. He suggested that you pay no more than market value, no 10–15% long-term economic value premium. He suggested that when the situation was as grave as it was in a country like Sweden at the time, that the appropriate and the best recourse was temporary nationalisation of the important institutions that would need to be nationalised. And the third thing that he said was the most important of all was transparency, so that the people who were in opposition would have a clear understanding of what was actually happening. Do you know that last night, when I saw on television at 9 o'clock, those bankers walking up Merrion Street into your office to get their briefing and to be told the real figures, you know, I actually felt a small rage that I had asked your office yesterday and the day before if I, as an opposition spokesperson, could get a briefing on an embargoed basis, which we in the Labour Party and I think in Fine Gael have, and Sinn Féin have always honoured. No, we couldn't. We'd get it when you stood up. Now, all I'm saying is there is something wrong. We're trying to solve a problem for this country that risks overwhelming the country. And who do you call in for the cosy fireside chat with one of the civil servants pulling down the window blind when your face came into view? Who do you call in? It's not Richard Burton, it's not Joan Burton. Oh no, it's that man. It's that man, excuse me, it's that man last year. Did I hear him saying, or did I not, that he would die before he would take state equity? And there he was, smiling for the camera. He was looking like a happy camper, you know, as he walked in. He was really looking like a happy camper. Now, what is it that he knows that we don't know? Because I don't think that what we've heard today is fantastic for the poor taxpayers or citizens of this country. I know that in the next few weeks you are asking people to take cuts in services, you're asking people perhaps to take cuts in their wages, you're asking people, and have asked them already, to pay more taxes. And there's the man, you know, it's a bit like as he walked along the Bois de Boulogne with an independent air, except it was Merrion Street he was walking along, the man that broke the bank in Monte Carlo. Do you remember that old British music hall song? Here was the man that broke, or some of the men, and I know they're all men, or they all seem to be men, who broke, if I may allow myself a less than worthy comment. Here he is strolling down, and he's looking a whole bunch happier than Willie O'D or anybody else sitting there when I saw them this afternoon. Even the Taoiseach doesn't look too happy, nor do you yourself looking beside you. You know, what is it that you told the bankers that made them feel happy? Are they getting more bailouts? Is there more money to come? I mean, you know, no, but this time last year, Minister, you told us that this was the best little bank guarantee in the world and that it would work a treat, and it didn't. You came back then some weeks later, you said there'd be a small little bit of recapitalisation required. Then you came back sometime later again and you said Anglo would have to be nationalised. Now, the Labour Party has offered you a mechanism that would allow you to do this job neatly. Take the banks in, you know, public ownership traditionally has been used in two ways in most European countries. One is where private capital fails to invest and forward a project like electrification in the early years of this state. The other is where private capital fails. And what has happened in the banking industry is that it has failed. It failed because it got caught in a bubble. The bubble was concentrated around property. You made references yourself to Japan. I am afraid that with what you've laid out before us here today, we are going down the Japanese as opposed to the Swedish route. I know in the referendum that I saw in the papers the other day that the Green Party held, that the Green Party members seemed to incline to the Swedish rather than the Japanese, and I think we all understand why. But think again of what the Swedes did. The Swedes nationalised their banks on a temporary basis. They didn't nationalise all the banks, just the ones that were totally desperate. The Labour Party is perfectly happy to do that. The people who have talked about having a problem with nationalised banks, having a problem with nationalised banks being subject to political interference, we've suggested a remedy for that, a banking commission that would absolutely supervise them at arm's length from all politicians. And secondly, we have advocated that if nationalised, the banks would keep the market disciplines of reporting on a quarterly basis as they would when they have their stock exchange quotation. Now, I believe that nationalisation in this context is temporary and for rescue purposes. Because of the blanket guarantee, I actually don't believe that it is possible to proceed with some of the other alternatives that have been put forward. Because the blanket guarantee, and by the way, you have announced today that you're resuming most of it on a rollover basis over a 5-year period. Can I finally say, in relation to your script today, I think it's disingenuous of you and of Alan Ahern to suggest that the bonds and NAMA will wash its face, to use the phrase that Professor Ahern uses. The bonds that you've set out there today and in the tables indicate that they will be something like 6 to 12-month bonds and that there will be a 1.5% interest rate. Now, you don't have to be, whoever. You don't have to be an economist to know that as other European countries move out of recession and stabilise, that gradually the ECB will start to increase interest rates. So the 1.5% rate is only likely to last for 6 months, a year, year and a half, 2 years maximum. And that is why I come back to the basic thing that I want from you, which is a business plan which sets out the flows, which sets out the likely life of the bond over its 10 years and its cost. Can I also say, in relation to the subordinated bonds that you referred to, I mean, that is not the risk sharing that was proposed by Professor Honohan. Professor Honohan proposed that the shareholders in the banks be given a share in NAMA so as to incentivise the banks to make NAMA work as well as possible and to share the risk. That's not what you're proposing. You're proposing to give these subordinated bonds, subordinated debts, to the banks as part of the overall package. Now, I don't know how the market is going to actually price them, but as you know, these are bonds which, under ECB rules, the 54 billion, they must be available for trading and for sale. Under ECB rules, as I understand them, they must be available on the open market. Now, you have not dealt at all with what happens to these bonds over their life. If all of those were to go on the open market in one jump, that would actually constitute a huge, if you like, competitor flotation of Irish debt onto the market at a time when the people in the NTMA are trying to raise roughly $1.5 billion a month in bond auctions. We want stuff like this, Minister, spelt out so that we can understand it. And to suggest that you have some magical formula there that has no cost to the Irish taxpayer, I just hope you don't believe it, because nobody in the bond markets believe it. And once those bonds are issued, they will actually rank in traders' minds in the same way as Irish government debt. Would you agree?
Not necessarily.
Okay. It's not necessary, but it's highly possible. Probable?
Are you talking about the main bonds or the subordinated?
I'm talking about both of them.
Both.
I mean, the second set of bonds might be discounted for the risk factor, and the interest rate might be higher. But the main bonds, they will of course be treated by the bond markets and by the markets as, once they're issued, as in effect becoming part of Irish government debt. They'll be called NAMA bonds. And finally, I just want to say, when you commissioned Professor well, I don't know if he's a professor. We're calling everybody professor these days. Sorry, Peter Bacon. He's an economist. I apologise to him. I apologise if I called him a professor. I think he's a mere doctor. Peter Bacon said, credibility, this was in his report to you, credibility is the overriding requirement of any proposal which is going to be successful at addressing banks' capital adequacy issues. This requires, firstly, that the operation be entirely transparent, that the resulting fiscal cost can be absorbed, and that the government's prospective debt profile is a sustainable one. Another necessary feature is that NAMA should operate independently and without interference in the discharge of its functions. Now, our criticisms can be summarised, right? NAMA's operations will not be transparent. The resulting fiscal costs, in our view, cannot be absorbed. The government's prospective debt profile, in the way you're doing this, is potentially not very sustainable. NAMA will not operate independently and without interference in the discharge of its functions. Why? Because in every line of the bill, you, the Minister, have the power to direct, to commit, to order. And while NAMA is finding a temporary home, as it were, under the auspices of the NTMA, the reality is that NAMA is a cuckoo in the NTMA nest because it is actually subject to your rule and your diktat as Minister for Finance. It makes it clear that the NTMA has the bill that the NTMA will have no functions whatsoever in relation to the governance, direction or management of NAMA. I think it can therefore be argued that the bill in its current form departs very significantly from the proposals made by its original promoter, Dr. Bacon. And for that reason, we would ask the government to reconsider the bill, to withdraw it, and to produce a new bill that actually seeks to address the really serious issues facing the country. I'm not convinced at the end of the day that the bill here today does very much for the 450,000 people who have lost their jobs. I'm not sure how much this bill will do to actually release credit into the economy. Like the guarantee this time last year that was supposed to do the same thing and deal with liquidity, I'm not convinced at all that it will do that. Therefore, the Labour Party would ask you to withdraw the bill and to bring forward an amended bill, or to bring forward the proposal that the Labour Party put forward, which has been used around the world as the best possible remedy. And can I just finish by quoting from the International Monetary Fund? Insolvent institutions with insufficient cash flows should be closed, merged or temporarily placed in public ownership until private sector solutions can be developed. There have been numerous instances, for example Japan, Sweden and the United States, where a period of public ownership has been used to cleanse balance sheets and pave the way to sales back to the private sector. We believe in the Labour Party that that is the best solution. That is the only solution that's really possible in the context of the blanket guarantee that you guys gave this time last year, and we recommend that to the House.
Thank you.